We're going to start with the afternoon presentation, and I would like to introduce Thomas van Vooren, Director with PwC, and also Bas Steen, who is Senior Manager of Digital Identity. And he's going to talk about, well, everyone knows to be or not to be, but now it's more about to SAAS or not to SAAS is the question. So give a big applause for Thomas van Vooren.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I must say, I feel a little bit uncomfortable standing on the stage. And it's not that I'm nervous, well, maybe a little bit, but you know, here at IDnext, talking about the next things in identity, we heard a lot about AI, about wallets. Now, with SAAS being around for quite a few years, I'm daring to ask the question, to SAAS or not to SAAS? So why is this man on stage even talking about this being a question? So I just want to set the scene a little bit on why I think this is a topic that we hopefully also at the end of this presentation have a conversation about. So I think as IAM professionals, we all see that our leadership within our respective organizations are still heavily investing in cyber and in identity and access management specifically. Something we also see as PwC from our digital trust survey, where we basically ask leaders in cybersecurity, risk and privacy on where do you see things heading. And one of the two key priorities that they have is actually addressing digital and technology risks and addressing cyber threats. And of course, it comes to no surprise that I think close to 100%, I think on the slide it says 95, they're looking at cloud and SaaS actually to put technology capabilities in place to actually start addressing those risks. Secondly, we of course also see, I think as again within our own organizations, that identity and access management is not new. It's a relatively well-established part of the cyber defense capability. But what we also see is that a lot of our organizations, and you might be one of them, actually will go through some kind of IAM transformation in the next few years, whether that's on access management, RJ, or PAM. Often triggered by end of life by existing solutions, also often just because the existing IAM capabilities can no longer really address the requirements that are needed to fulfill to address those cyber risks. So people in organizations are at a crossroads in terms of replacing their IAM capability to go either on-premise in the cloud that is, or to go truly SaaS. And of course, SaaS is really appealing to a lot of us because it gives us a lot of the benefits in terms of being able to focus on the business value, because we have get awesome time to service. We're way quicker in terms of being up and running. We don't have to worry about having scarce resources in our teams in terms of knowledge and expertise that is very hard to find in the market. And of course, SaaS in IAM has been around for quite some time, so it's a very viable path to actually go through one of your IAM transformations based on SaaS. However, within SaaS, not all SaaS is created equal or is not equal at this point. So I just want to highlight a couple of key distinctions within the different domains we have within IAM, being access management, IJ, and PAM, privileged access management, and to really see where are some of the differences that you need to take into account when you want to go SaaS in one of these areas. Of course, if you look at access management, it's relatively well established, been around in SaaS versions for quite some time, and has of course been adopted quite heavily because we have so many standards for such a long time already. So in terms of getting that integrated in your landscape, no-brainer really. But if you look at identity governance, for example, and the feature parity with regards to their on-prem cousins, maybe the breadth is there, but not really the depth. So you might find yourself going SaaS in the IJ space that you might run into some problems fulfilling on requirements that might have been fulfilled before on your existing solution. And with regards to PAM, the feature parity is really already there, much like access management. But what we see that our clients often forget is that with PAM, you're really more locked into also what the rest of your IT estate looks like in terms of being a hybrid between on-prem and cloud. With that, also a lot of the IT components to actually integrate PAM within your landscape also remain on site. So some of the perceived benefits with regards to reduced operational complexity and reduced technical operations is not really always fulfilled. So depending on where your requirements are for your IAM transformation and what areas you're looking to transform in, these are things that I think you need to take into account. So why does this matter? Like I said, perceived benefits might not even be realized, in the example of privileged access management and remaining technical complexity, for example, but also it might actually have impact on how you execute your program and how the program is perceived when you transform your IAM capabilities. So it's something you need to take into account when you plan for it, so that you take everybody along the journey. I just want to talk about a couple of examples in this, in terms of how it can be impacting when you go through that transformation. One is, for example, with new ways of working. So what we see quite a lot is that with on-premise solutions being in place, they typically are heavily customized, catering to very specific requirements, that once you go to SaaS, it's very difficult to implement the same kind of processes. So that's something you need to be aware of, either by making a decision in the first place to go SaaS or not, or if you do choose to go for SaaS, is that you actually take the necessary measures that people are receptive, not reluctant, to actually receive the change in the first place. So really that you do the right things in your program to make it a success. One of the examples, one of the clients that we have had, for example, is where within an existing solution, you had a very strong delegated administration model, had a lot of data segmentation, basically to have Chinese walls within a company, that once they moved to SaaS, those capabilities were not really present in their solution. So what happened is that a lot of the central team had to take on things like role administration requests or doing identity administration type of work. So it had quite a huge impact on the flexibility that the business had to actually continue the way they were used to. And in order to actually counter that and to help the business, they had to grow their operational capacity within the IAM team to be able to follow on these administration requests. So it can be really impactful if you're not aware of these kind of changes between your current ways of working and how SaaS is able to facilitate that. Same as for the changing role of the IAM team, not just that the capacity that you need within your IAM team might grow because of product issues when you go SaaS without being aware of it, but also in a positive flow that the SaaS is doing what you want, rather than your team spending a lot of time on technical maintenance or technical operations. They actually need to shift, for example, to being more business facilitators. So it's an opportunity for people to change their role in the teams and to also focus on more value-add activities to actually get the business, more applications onboarded or roles changed more quickly to fit their business processes. But it can also be considered a threat, and that's something that you need to be aware of when you go through a project, because you need those same people actually to make it a success. And maybe one final thing to note is that there are also different technical challenges. So with SaaS, of course, a lot of these technical challenges are taken out of our hands because the deployment is done for us. But there's just slight differences. So there's more dependency on your SaaS vendor, for example, if you want to promote things to production. So that's something you need to take into account. And sometimes for the product gaps that there are in the SaaS in a SaaS solution, if you're not willing to sort of adjust your way of working, but want to still tailor to those specific needs or way of working, it might mean that you need to take on additional components in your landscape, whether that's BI, tooling for dashboarding, for example, or routing access requests through a ServiceNow or other kind of IT service management tool. The complexity doesn't necessarily in that area become less. So that's nice, but what can you do about it? And appreciate that some of these are maybe like what we call in Dutch open doors. I'm not sure how that translates really well, but really think it through. So we see a lot of our clients because, for example, again, in the IJ space, products have been mature for quite some time, that they think, okay, this is like cooking with water, doesn't really matter, I just buy a tool and it will work anyway. With SaaS, again, there are some limitations that you need into account and truly understand your way of working. So really spend the time to understand what are your minimum requirements, and if you see sort of any deviations from current way of working, really understand how it impacts the transition, either from a policy perspective, ways of working, you name it. Of course, enrich your plan. So what we have seen, what is becoming more relevant is do that workforce planning. So what does your program do in terms of workforce planning? So let's say the human capital side of things, to make sure that the IAM team that you have is making the switch to the role that they will have in a new situation, or that you help people grow into other roles in your company. If you can sort of provide that perspective, then they're also on board for actually helping you be successful in the actual transition. And yeah, I think a lot of us do that already, but consulting peers that are on a similar journey is, I think, underestimated how powerful it is. And I think one key thing to look at there, from my experience, is that don't just look at where they're heading, but rather where they're coming from. So that might be an existing technology that you are also migrating away from, and you can understand more the specific challenges that you will also have on your path transitioning to SaaS. Of course, there's always a different path, right? If you really do your homework and you conclude, okay, SaaS is a good fit, but then I might need to cater the impact in my program through more people and change efforts, for example, that's fine. We see a lot of clients being successful doing that. It is also quite fine to see, on-premise software deployed in cloud as a viable alternative and an intermediate stepping stone before you fully transition to SaaS. And with that, I actually want to hand over to my colleague Bas Steen, who will actually talk about how you can achieve some of the SaaS benefits deploying to cloud.
To SaaS or not to SaaS? Why is that even a question? Well, to understand that, we have to take a closer look at what the kind of benefits a SaaS platform normally gives you. Well, of course, there's a cost aspect. So you pay as you go instead of like buying the infrastructure beforehand, buying the license before it, and have huge sunk costs. So with SaaS providers, you just pay as you go. There's also an operational aspect. So the SaaS provider provides you new features almost every month, and you don't have to worry about the upgrades anymore. There's a security aspect. So the SaaS provider takes care of all the security. You don't have to take the product and harden it and take care of all the security. Because they're in the cloud and you have SLA with your SaaS provider, you also get scalability and availability. It's done for you. You don't have to do it yourself anymore. And most of all, there's also ease of use, right? You buy the product and you can use it from the start. And all of that combined makes sure that you can actually focus on providing business value from the start. Well, how do these SaaS providers actually do that, right? So SaaS wasn't around 10 years ago. So why suddenly now we have lots of these SaaS providers? And a lot of that is related to certain technology trends that have come up in recent years. So we have cloud computing. We can now spin up millions of VMs in the cloud or things like that. We have concepts like Docker and Kubernetes, which allow us to easily package and deploy our applications into this cloud environment. We have concepts as infrastructure as code and configuration as code, which allows us to deploy infrastructure in a really controlled manner. So we can decide, using our Git repository, okay, deploy this, right? And we can actually do security based on that. And all of these things and all these 100 technologies that came with it allowed these SaaS providers to pop up like every week. So we thought, okay, we have a client that still wants to use the on-prem product because they need to, because Thomas said they want the requirements. How can we make sure that we do it in such a way that you still get some of these benefits of SaaS? Well, this is the approach we came up with. So we take the products, right? So we take the on-prem products and we containerize them. So we make them into a Docker image. And this is usually not an easy task because these products are not built for the cloud. They have, I don't know if you remember these manuals that you had to go through to install the product. Well, we try to automate that and make a Docker image out of it so that it's a consistent way of building it. Then we apply security benefits to it. So we take the Docker image, we harden it, and we make sure it's secure. And we apply what we call our own best practices to it. So things normally we go to a project, and the first thing we do is we apply all these best practice configuration. Now we already do that inside the Docker image, which leads to our own, we call it the PwC image. You can also make it a custom image. And then, in order to keep this up to date, we use modern CI/CD pipelines. So we start with, well, we have a new feature. Once the developer tries to commit, we're already there. Before he even commits, apply all the best practices. We check, okay, does your Docker file apply the best practices? Is your code that you commit compliant to our quality standards? Well, if that's all okay, you can make a merge request. We apply the 4i principle, and then we start into the CE pipeline. We start building the image. And once we have an image, of course, we can do scanning on it. We can see, hey, does this image contain any known vulnerabilities? Do we see other problems with this image? So we do already that in the build process. Then we run some unit tests to make sure it's all okay, and we deploy it. Once it's deployed, we can actually check if it works, which is very handy, for instance, when you do upgrades, because if a product is upgrade, you want to make sure that it still is doing what you think it should do. Well, once that's all okay, we deploy it to production, and we have an image that we think is ready to ship to the customer. So at the customer side, the only thing we do is we apply whatever the client configuration is, and we deploy that into their cloud infrastructure. And doing that makes sure that we can actually utilize the benefits of the cloud. So we deploy into the Kubernetes cluster, which means we have scaling and we have availability. We use a PaaS Oracle database, for instance. We make sure we have backups and availability, and we have multi-zones. So we actually try to combine the best practices that we have. We deploy it into the cloud environment. And then what you see, if you look at these initial benefits again, that we achieve many of the same things. So for cost, because we use the cloud infrastructure, you pay as you go. Of course, you have still a little bit of the sunk cost of the on-prem license, but that's still okay. The upgrades, well, in this case, because we at the PwC side take care of the upgrades, it's very much mature, so you don't really have to worry about that. Security comes with our image, but also it comes from the cloud provider that you use. So many of these cloud providers already have many security checks on the infrastructure. So it's also not something you really have to worry about. Scalability and availability, same thing. So the scalability comes from the cloud provider, and the availability too. And ease of use, because, well, if you have the infrastructure ready, if you use our image, you can actually focus on business functionality from the start. Which leads to the question, Thomas, to SaaS or not to SaaS?
Is it not?
Yeah.
No? Sorry. I thought he was finished with his presentation, so I threw him off the stage. But, sorry about that. No, so to SaaS or not to SaaS, you know, of course, the pin in the title was the not, in terms of it really depends on, of course, on your situation. I think the ask to you is if you go on your own transition to a new IAM solution, regardless of whether that's access management, IGA or PAM, is that you really think about, you know, what does that question actually mean for me? What is the answer? Of course, SaaS-based IAM, not challenging that at all. It's more than viable today. There's a lot of great stuff in the market. It's just, you know, our ask is, you know, take maturity differences into account between the domains, even between vendors, and really think about, you know, what does it mean for adjusting the ways of working within our organization. And I guess as to the story of Bas, you know, on-prem deployed right, so on-prem deployed into the cloud in terms of a proper software deployment architecture with the right, you know, containerization and scaling and best practices regards to software development. It could be a good intermediate stepping stone to SaaS and still get some of the benefits that are relevant when you want to have the same benefits as SaaS. And again, think, plan, and only then do. Product selection is never a strategy, but especially with SaaS, my recommendation to you is not to take that too lightly if you will really consider that to be the target. So with that, this concludes our presentation, and I'll be willing, guessing Bas too, to take on any questions. Yes. Pretty sure that Robert at least has thought of one to ask.
Great presentation, thank you. I have one question, because you prepare a proprietary image, you harden, and does it affect application performance? Any latency or?
No. Basically, no. So no.
Is that sufficient answer? Yeah. Any other questions? Who is currently struggling going to SaaS or to cloud, or say, well, everything is just going smoothly? Some people are diving now. Oh, Mathieu. Oh.
Are you struggling, Mathieu?
Struggling or just, well, there's something coming to you with the microphone. So.
Hi, the complexity, I'm Boris from UBQ, Boris Gardnoff. the complexity with these kinds of things is always is that it's not an application, but it's a piece of core infrastructure. So that means that you get into a recursion where you're deploying to your cloud, but then you're using your privileged account management to actually also do the cloud. So that means that how do you solve the snake that bites its tail?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, not sure if I'm answering it right, but please do let me know. So I think one of the things that, so with clients, and there is a client in this room today, I won't call him out, but where we are working on the different IAM capabilities, so access management, privileged access management, and RJ. And of course, I mean, this drum has been beaten for quite a few years already, but the idea is, of course, that you start delivering business value as soon as possible. So, of course, it's about integrating those business applications. At the same time, it's very hard to explain to your CISO why your admin account of your IJ solution is not on your privileged access management solution. So, what we typically try to do in projects is, to onboard those as well, but don't make the mistake of, focusing too much on your own bubble, because then you're not really addressing the business value of why you're doing IAM in the first place. So, you have to do it in parallel. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's yeah. All right.
So, hi, Matthew Alstrom, Inter-IKEA. But so a couple of things, latency, just to react on that one. Yeah, I think for most use cases, I don't think it's much of a big deal. But we just came from a visit to a manufacturing part of our business where they really stress that single sign-on returns from a cloud solution is actually not acceptable for the runtime OT. So for the authentication solutions, they do look on-prem. Another thing. I was wondering if you could speak to the distinction between infrastructure and application. You showed in the choices there, talked about the feature parity of the SaaS application, but then also talked about maybe some of the infrastructure considerations. Could you speak maybe to, for example, taking a classic FAT client and deploying it on a cloud infrastructure? Maybe a bit of getting the infrastructure SaaS or PaaS maybe, or IaaS, however you want to call it.
Yeah, so if you look, for instance, at let's take SailPoint as an example. They have like Identity Now and they have IAQ, and that's really the application side of things. So there's like function disparity between that. But in order for Identity Now you don't need anything to deploy because it just runs. But for IAQ to run, you need infrastructure. You need an application server, right? And that application server needs a VM, or at least it needs something to run it. So if you look at this picture, for instance, the application is just these two things. The rest is all infrastructure.
And that's the benefit you get with using public cloud or PaaS, of course, and trying to do it out of your own DC. And I don't know who does that anyway these days, but might be very specific use cases.
Oh, I don't know, but still I have a question for you, Thomas.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because we are talking about the infrastructure, the technical part, but also organizations are struggling with the governance, I think, in order to manage this. As you have different organization units are obtaining all kinds of applications within the SaaS. So how do you deal this with as an organization from a governance perspective? How do you make sure that you are in control?
That's the adoption of SaaS in general, then you mean? Wow, it's a little bit out of my area of expertise, perhaps.
Yeah,
but
I thought so. That's why I'm asking.
No, so I think when we talk about DLP or data leakage prevention, if you just want to get visibility of what applications are being used in my organization and where does the data travel, of course there are solutions that help get visibility of that at the network parameter. Of course, that assumes that you have some kind of corporate device that is onboarded with a corporate, of course, enterprise identity that allows you to do that. So it's a bit more difficult with bring your own device kind of strategy. But solutions like, this is just a vendor, but like Netscope, for example, allows you to get visibility of where SaaS is being used. And with that also give you pointers of where do you maybe need to intervene, put more restrictions on, or maybe just police it a little bit. So I would be looking at those kinds of solutions to get visibility of where your business is using SaaS in the first place.
And also, if you look at it from an infrastructure perspective, all these PaaS components can have managed identities nowadays. So all your workloads in the cloud provider have identities, and you can just treat them as identities. So load them into your governance tool. They all have roles. They are identities. So you can apply the same principles as you would do to a normal identity to your cloud identity. Because in the end, it's all identity with privileges.
Yeah, okay. But I think this morning we saw a presentation from Jacoba, as you saw the slide where we had all kinds of different systems there, but it's going to be more complex. So I can also mention in this situation that it's really difficult for organizations from a governance perspective how to manage this, how to handle this.
Yeah, it's not an easy question.
But let me give a big applause for Thomas and Bas.